The warm, coastal breeze of a late summer evening swept through the luxurious Hamptons villa, where Mark Sinclair found himself attending yet another business social gathering. He was used to these kinds of events, lavish affairs with influential people, perfect for networking. Tonight, however, felt different. Perhaps it was the location. The villa belonged to his longtime friend, Eric Blackwood, a suave and successful businessman. Mark had always admired Eric's charm, his ability to command attention without seeming to try. Eric was everything Mark aspired to be, or at least, that's what he thought before tonight. Mark, 38 years old, was at a point in his life where he felt that everything should be falling into place. He had a successful career in marketing, rising quickly through the ranks at his Manhattan-based firm. He was respected, reliable, and focused. His wife, Sophie Sinclair, 34, was the jewel of his life, a dazzling beauty with blonde hair that framed her face like a halo. Sophie was the woman every man dreamed of marrying. At least that's what everyone said. To outsiders, they had the perfect life, a successful, handsome couple, living in a penthouse overlooking Central Park, attending charity galas, mingling with the New York elite. But behind closed doors, things were different. Mark had been pouring himself into his work for the last few years, hoping to secure a top position at his firm. This ambition left little room for personal time with Sophie. He justified it as a temporary sacrifice, something necessary to secure their future. Sophie, on the other hand, had grown restless. She wasn't built for the solitude that Mark's long hours brought. She thrived on attention, excitement, and adventure, traits that made her irresistible to others, but increasingly difficult for Mark to understand. This particular evening at Eric's villa was one of those rare occasions when Mark decided to let loose a little. The stress of his job had been weighing him down, and Sophie had insisted they attend. "You need a break, Mark. You're always working," she had said, her tone slightly clipped, as if there were more to her frustration than she let on. Sophie was right. He did need a break. So here he was, dressed in a tailored suit, drink in hand, mingling with people he only vaguely knew. Sophie, as always, was the center of attention. She floated around the party in a crimson silk gown that hugged her curves, her laughter infectious, her presence magnetic. Mark watched her from across the room, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and guilt. She was so beautiful, so full of life, and here he was, always too preoccupied with work to truly appreciate her. He had promised himself that things would change, that he'd spend more time with her. After this promotion, everything would be different. But life doesn't wait for perfect timing. As the evening progressed, Mark found himself engrossed in a conversation with a potential business partner. It was a tedious discussion about market shares, a topic that usually captivated him. But tonight, his mind kept wandering. He caught glimpses of Sophie laughing with Eric. They were standing too close, and something about the way they exchanged glances made his stomach twist. Mark shook off the feeling. Eric was his friend, and Sophie had always been flirtatious. That's just who she was. There was no reason to feel uneasy. And yet, that nagging doubt lingered in the back of his mind, a shadow that refused to be dispelled. At some point in the evening, Mark excused himself from the conversation and decided to take a break outside. The villa's sprawling gardens were illuminated by soft lanterns, casting a romantic glow on the pathways. He wandered aimlessly, the soft murmur of the party fading into the background. He needed a moment to clear his head, to shake off the inexplicable anxiety that had settled in his chest. That's when he heard it, Sophie's voice, hushed but unmistakable, coming from a secluded corner of the garden. Mark stopped in his tracks, instinctively drawn toward the sound. He couldn't make out the words at first, but as he moved closer, the conversation became clearer. "I can't believe we've been doing this for months," Sophie was saying, her voice a mixture of excitement and guilt. "It's like living a double life." Mark's breath caught in his throat. His first instinct was to turn around and walk away, to pretend he hadn't heard anything. But something compelled him to stay, to listen. "I know. came a second voice, Eric's. His tone was smooth, almost soothing. But we've been careful. Mark hasn't noticed a thing. He's too wrapped up in his work to even suspect. Mark's heart pounded in his chest. Each beat a hammer against his rib cage. He stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. From his hidden vantage point, he could see them now, standing under the soft glow of the lanterns. Sophie was facing Eric, her hand resting on his arm. Her expression conflicted. "He's a good man," Sophie said softly, her voice tinged with regret. "I never wanted to hurt him." "You're not hurting him," Eric replied, his voice low and persuasive. "You're just doing what you need to do to feel alive again. He doesn't have to know." Mark felt like the ground had been ripped out from under him. His worst fears, the ones he had buried deep inside, were now confirmed in the most brutal way possible. Sophie, the woman he had devoted his life to, was having an affair with his closest friend. The shock of the betrayal left him momentarily paralyzed. He wanted to storm in, to confront them, to demand answers, but instead, he found himself rooted to the spot, listening in disbelief, as the people he trusted most spoke of their secret relationship with such casual familiarity. "I hate sneaking around like this," Sophie said, her voice wavering. "But you're right. Mark's so focused on his career. I feel like I've been invisible for years. I don't know what to do anymore." Eric stepped closer to her, his hand gently brushing her cheek. "You deserve more than being someone's afterthought, Sophie. With me, you're the center of attention, the way you should be." Mark clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. He had never felt such an intense mix of emotions: anger, heartbreak, betrayal, and disbelief, all swirled within him, leaving him raw and exposed. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to make them see how deeply they had wounded him. But instead, he forced himself to stay silent. Bursting in on them now would only lead to a scene, one that he wasn't emotionally prepared to face. "I don't know how much longer we can keep this up," Sophie said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's exhausting, lying to Mark all the time. I hate myself for it." Eric wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "You don't have to make any decisions right now. We'll figure it out. But remember, Sophie, you deserve to be happy. That's all that matters." Mark felt like he was going to be sick. The betrayal cut deeper than anything he had ever experienced. It wasn't just the affair, it was the way they spoke about him, as if he were some distant figure in their lives, someone to be pitied rather than respected. The realization that his marriage had been a facade, that Sophie had been leading a double life for months, left him shattered. But as much as he wanted to confront them, to demand answers, he knew this wasn't the time. Not here, not now. The party was still in full swing, and creating a scene would only make things worse. He needed time to process, to think, to figure out what to do next. Mark quietly retreated, slipping back into the shadows of the garden, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on being level-headed, on not letting emotions get the better of him. But tonight, that self-control was slipping away, replaced by a searing rage and overwhelming grief. He made his way back into the villa, the noise of the party, a distant hum in his ears. People smiled at him as he passed, oblivious to the turmoil raging inside him. He forced a polite nod, his face a mask of calm, but inside, he was crumbling. Sophie and Eric rejoined the party, not long after, both of them laughing and chatting, as if nothing had happened. Mark watched them from across the room, his stomach churning. How could they be so brazen? How could they lie to his face, all the while knowing what they had been doing behind his back? For the rest of the evening, Mark went through the motions, engaging in small talk with other guests, all the while keeping a close eye on Sophie and Eric. His mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? How many lies had Sophie told him? And most importantly, what was he going to do about it? By the time the party wound down, Mark had made a decision. He wasn't going to confront Sophie tonight. He needed time to gather his thoughts, to figure out his next move. The revelation of the affair had shattered his world, but he wasn't going to let it destroy him. The morning after the party, Mark woke early, unable to sleep. He sat in the kitchen of their penthouse, a cup of coffee in front of him, but untouched. The events of the previous night replayed in his mind over and over again, each repetition cutting deeper. Sophie entered the kitchen a little while later, her hair tousled, her face glowing from the night before. She smiled at him, a casual, loving gesture that made Mark's stomach twist in knots. How could she act so normal, so innocent, after everything that had happened? "Good morning," she said, leaning in to kiss him on the cheek. He flinched slightly, unable to mask the pain that flashed across his face. She paused, noticing his tense expression. "Mark, is everything okay?" Mark set down his coffee cup, his hands trembling slightly. This was it. The moment he had dreaded and anticipated in equal measure. He had thought about waiting, about confronting her later when he was calmer, but the words were already on the tip of his tongue, begging to be released. "I heard you last night," he said quietly, his voice tight with emotion. Sophie frowned, confusion flickering across her face. "What do you mean?" "In the garden," Mark continued, his gaze fixed on her. "I heard everything, Sophie, you and Eric." Sophie's face drained of color, her eyes widening in shock. For a moment, she was speechless, her mouth opening and closing, as if she couldn't quite process what he had just said. "Mark, she began. But he cut her off, his voice rising with anger. "Don't," he snapped. "Don't lie to me anymore. I heard everything. How long has this been going on?" Sophie looked away, guilt and shame written all over her face. She didn't answer, but her silence was all the confirmation Mark needed. He stood up from the table, his hands clenched into fists. "How could you do this to me, Sophie, to us? I've spent years working to build a life for us, to give you everything you could ever want, and this is how you repay me." Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes, but Mark didn't care. His own pain was too overwhelming to feel any sympathy for her in that moment. "I didn't want this to happen," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," Mark said, his voice cold. "You made a choice, Sophie. You chose to betray me, and I can't." He paused, his throat tight with emotion. He couldn't finish the sentence. He couldn't bring himself to say the words that would end their marriage, even though he knew that was where this was heading. Sophie took a step toward him, her eyes pleading. "Please, Mark, I'm sorry. I made a mistake, but I still love you. Can't we fix this? Can't we try to make things right?" Mark stared at her, his heart torn in two. A part of him wanted to believe her, to forgive her, to try to rebuild what they had lost, but the other part of him, the part that had heard her confess her love for another man, knew that some things were too broken to be repaired. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again," he said quietly, his voice hollow. "And without trust, there's nothing left." Sophie's tears spilled over, and she covered her face with her hands, sobbing. But Mark felt no comfort in her remorse. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. Mark left the apartment that day, taking only what he needed. He didn't look back. The betrayal had cut too deep, and staying in that penthouse, with all its memories, was unbearable. As he walked through the streets of New York, the city bustling with life around him, Mark felt a strange sense of liberation. The pain of Sophie's betrayal would take time to heal, but he knew that he couldn't let it define him. He had lost something precious, but he had also gained clarity. Trust was fragile, easily shattered, but impossible to rebuild once broken. And now, Mark was free to rebuild his life on his own terms. Life is unpredictable, filled with moments that challenge us in ways we never imagined. For Mark, the revelation of Sophie's affair shattered the illusion of a perfect life, but it also gave him the strength to move forward. Sometimes, the hardest moments in life lead to the most profound personal growth. Thank you for watching. If you've been moved by this story, or have your own thoughts about relationships and trust, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this. What would you do if you were in Mark's shoes? Would you confront the betrayal or walk away? Let us know your thoughts, and we'll see you in the next story.